So today on Rod Rides and Wrenches, we are going to be talking about the clutch and going to do some really basic replacement of the friction pads on a couple of different bikes, along with the pressure plate spring, the end pressure plate springs. So there are a number of different types of clutches that you're going to find on different motorcycles. We're working today on a 1050 Sprint. If you remember this bike from the ST versus GT shootout that we did a few weeks back, we were riding the clutch just a little bit hard in the 0 to 75 mile per hour test, and basically discovered that the clutch wasn't quite as good as perhaps initially we thought it was, or it certainly caused it enough wear to start acting up. Some of the indications that it's time for a new clutch include difficult shifting. In other words, you find it a little more difficult than normal to shift through the gears, particularly as you're shifting down. I find it certainly more prevalent that the clutch is starting to wear out. Clutch slippage. In other words, typically when you're on the highway, you crank on to pass somebody, and as the RPM increases, you'll start to feel a slit or a little bit of a give in the back end, and that's the friction plates and the pressure plates slipping against each other. So that's a really good indication. Now, one of the things you want to do before you start tearing into your clutch is make sure that your clutch cable, if it's so equipped like this one is with a cable, is properly adjusted. And that starts at the clutch lever. You want to have no more than 1/8 of an inch of play within the clutch. And what that means is that where the clutch starts to pull back, you want to have only 1/8 of an inch of movement. You don't want it so tight that it is like razor sharp and you're already engaging the clutch even though the clutch is all the way extended, or the opposite, where it doesn't feel like you have enough clutch lever in order to make the clutch work. So that's the first place to check adjustment. If there isn't enough adjustment there for the clutch cable, then you can move down to the lower part right here. So what this is an adjustment nut and a locking nut on the bottom end of the cable.
To adjust the clutch cable at the lower end, start at the clutch lever and ensure the adjuster up there is set in the middle of its threads where it enters the control. Basically, you want to have an equal amount of adjustment both in and out up top at the lever before adjusting the clutch cable at the bottom.
So the other thing that we want to do when we check the clutch cable adjustment is make sure that it's properly lubricated. A cable lubrication tool like this typically sells less than 20 bucks and is one of the most valuable tools you can have for maintaining your bike in your toolbox. Highly recommend getting one. So when we apply this tool to the cable, we want to make sure that it's tightened up properly, and then I start with some penetrating fluid just to make sure that we've cleaned the rust off the cable, potentially if there's any on the end, clear the dirt and grime that's at the end of the cable out. And we want to squirt some penetrating fluid in there, kind of let it settle and work its way down, squirt a little bit more in, and eventually you'll start to see the fluid come out here on the bottom of the cable. And you can, I don't know if you can get in there and see that, but you can see that fluid start to come down the bottom. And then after that's done, we want to clear the penetrating fluid out because that's not a really good lubricant for long term, and then apply some lubricant. And the lubricant that I use in both these cases, the penetrating fluid and the lubricant, are both made by WD-40, but again, the second one is specifically a lubricant designed for long-term use. So we're taking time to install some aftermarket levers, and the other thing you always want to check if you're having difficulty with any of your levers, clutch, brake, is that the pivot points are clean and that they're greased up. In this case, we have a bushing that actually slides inside the lever. So we're just going to lubricate this up with some grease. I'm using Molly grease, but any good grease should work. You can also use some anti-seize compound if you don't have any moly grease around. It'll work quite well. So we're going to do that and slide this bushing into the lever. And then we can just kind of clean that up a little bit so we don't hold too much dirt. And I've taken the bolt, coated it with some anti-seize, and we're going to put that back in.
There are a variety of clutches in motorcycles. I don't have the time to explain specialty clutches like a recluse or other radius style clutches, but you can go ahead and Google that one. The two standard clutches we are working with today are wet multi-plate. What that means is the clutch is lubricated by the engine or transmission oil system. In the case of a Harley-Davidson and similar American V-twin designs, the oil for the clutch is isolated to the primary drive. The clutch is made up of multiple plates, both friction and dry plates, with a spring-loaded pressure plate on the outside that hold the drive and friction plates together when you release your clutch. Another type of multi-plate clutch is a dry clutch. This type of clutch is typically only used in high-performance racing bikes or some other application like an open primary drive system. Dry clutch has the advantage of not using any oil. This saves weight, of course, and increases performance since the clutch basket is not turning through the resistance of a fluid and just looks and sounds really cool. The downside is that dry clutches wear faster and wear to a greater extent than wet clutches, damaging all clutch components like the basket and inner drum. They don't have the oil to lubricate the friction in dry plates, so dry clutches snap together quicker when you release that clutch lever and are not as smooth for the average daily rider, but they are freaking cool. The final type of clutch we're going to talk about is a single plate dry unit. These clutches are typically found on BMW R motors, Moto Guzzis, and the like that use an automotive style single drive and single friction plate. The positives of these clutches are that they last a very long time, in some cases even 100,000 miles. Rare, but if you believe everything you read on the internet, and I do, it's possible. They are an interesting option. The downside is these clutches are expensive to replace, both in components and labor. In all applications, the clutch pack sits between the engine and transmission, and these are two separate units, meaning that either the transmission or the engine have to be removed from the bike in order to access the clutch. But more on this at a later date. This wraps up part 1 in our series on motorcycle clutches. We hope you learned something and enjoyed the video. We have disassembly and reassembly of some clutches in our next video in this segment, so be sure to like, subscribe, and set your notifications for this channel to high alert. We have a number of motorcycle maintenance videos and reviews of motorcycles on the channel, so be sure to check that out as well. Until later, ride safe.